Thank you for coming.
Yes.
You're very welcome.
This is the scientific part now.
Yes.
I have to go to work, so we'll be in touch for
We will.
Well, I can just as well start. I'm sure they will bring up my PowerPoint. Well, first of all, I must thank the organizer for inviting me to give such a keynote. It is indeed a great honor, which I've been retired many years ago, so when I'm asked to do this thing, give this talk, it makes me very happy. I guess I should apologize for not dressing up, which what I usually do when I give keynotes, but my suitcase didn't arrive with me, so here I am. I'm going to talk about this theme, the middle way, small-scale fisheries in the blue economy. Now, I think I should have called it Rethink the Blue, small-scale fisheries in the blue economy. It would have been more appropriate for the topic of this meeting, but that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to rethink the blue economy, but from this perspective of small-scale fisheries. I am thrilled, of course, to be back in Croatia. I was here a year ago. And didn't come as far north as this, but I know it from before that Croatia is a beautiful country. The first time I visited Croatia was in 1981, and I'm sure a lot of you who are here were not born then. It's a long time ago, and I still had hair on my head at that time. I came here to attend a meeting or a course, 1 month course at the European University, had a campus at that time in Dubrovnik. Croatia was then, as you know, part of Yugoslavia. And the course was about the unique model of decentralized workers' self-management that Yugoslavia was experimenting with at that time. The idea was to build something different from a Soviet central state economy and a Western capitalist market model, build something in between. Throughout my career, I have always been interested in the space between state and market. And that was what made me sign up for the Dubrovnik course. It is also an issue that is still in my fisheries work. My thinking back then and now is that the two extremes, state or market, will not bring what we are looking for, neither in small-scale fisheries nor in society as a whole. Neither do I think that state and market, the mixture of the two, will deliver on all accounts, if it only means that the state impose restrictions on markets. There must be, and indeed there is, a middle way, a space in between state and market that can be filled with something different. A governance model that gives ample room for civil society and local communities in socio-political governance, which includes stakeholders in a constructive role in the governance process. Why should we then not explore the possibility of such a middle way? The Yugoslavian experiment was therefore intriguing to me. It later inspired my work on producer cooperatives and fisheries, for instance, in studies I did in Poland and Bulgaria with a colleague from University of Gdansk, which we published in Maritime Studies in the 1990s. Norway my own country, has an interesting history and experience with the cooperative model in fisheries, which I have written a lot about. My work on, if you know my work, on co-management as a non-state and non-market way of managing fisheries, well, that was developed from there. The idea of finding solutions to our governance challenge between state and markets lives on in academic quarters. It is captured in a manner we think of interactive governance in fisheries, for instance, and in the way the FAO, which is the UN Organization for Food and Agriculture, is thinking about small-scale fisheries in order to make them more sustainable as an industry and as a way of improving the well-being of the people who inhabit this sector. Small-scale fisheries is a sector. I hope you can see this. They may be small in number when you look at them in the context of a particular country, but if you add up the numbers on a global scale, we are talking about millions and millions of people who draw their livelihoods from small-scale fisheries. These are numbers that FAO have produced, and I'm not sure that if they are up to date even. Statistics in small-scale fisheries is always unreliable because it is, to a large extent, an informal sector that doesn't necessarily are visible from a central government statistical office perspective. These are the numbers, and therefore it's reason to be interested in the fate of this sector. The idea of finding a solution in between the state and the market is also prevalent in the thinking that FAO is now making on the fate of small-scale fisheries. They are thinking in terms of middle-way institutions because they provide opportunities for empowering the sector which it needs in order to remain viable. These middle-way institutions are not interesting from a functional perspective. They are also a way of deepening our democracy, making it a more interactive, more participatory, allowing grassroots to be involved, and so on. The idea is, and that is a criticism I often hear, is that the idea is not to replace, but to add what political scientists call the numerical democracy which we use when we cast our votes in general election. The numerical model is not for democratizing the economy and the way we manage natural resources. We need a more interactive, participatory, co-governance model, which I try to illustrate here. We are, in other words, looking for solutions that are inside that circle. And as a research topic, we should be interested, therefore, in what is going on in that circle. While humans interact, they gather, form groups and communities. Sometimes they compete as individuals, as they do in markets, with a single concern in mind, their own interests. Sometimes they compete as groups, maybe also, or particularly also, with that self-interest in mind. But sometimes they run their economy with a concern for others, the community, and for the environment. They are then not just driven by egoistic self-interest, but by a sense of social responsible and social justice. In a governance context, people and groups are, of course, restricted by government rules and regulations. They may also be similarly ruled by the rules they author themselves. This is what was Elinor Ostrom's governance model, which gave her the economics Nobel Prize as a political scientist. Small-scale fisheries provide numerous examples of the latter. The fact that they are often informally organized does not make them less real, just more difficult to detect. Small-scale fisheries and the local community exist in a symbiotic, often informal relationships, which, when broken, will damage both. The symbiosis is easy to break, but hard to rebuild once broken. The symbiosis creates energy and synergy. The symbiotic relationships between small-scale fisheries and local communities is notably not just a convenient arrangement of mutual benefit, but a deeply cultural phenomenon with a moral content. This is why communities must be part of the equation, also in the blue economy. In fisheries management bent on neoliberalism, they are not. It is all about the state and the market, and the arrow goes as the arrow goes here on the left. That is a pity in many ways. Communities, when missing a focus, results in a lost opportunity. When communities are out of sight, we do not understand their contribution. Neither do we, for instance, understand the fundamental role that women play in small-scale fisheries. You saw from FAO that about half of the people involved in small-scale fisheries are indeed women. Social scientists have often been interested in the direct contribution that women give to small-scale fisheries when they, for instance, bait the lines or mend the nets or run the economy, etc. Things that the fisher husband cannot do without. But women also provides an indirect service when they make the community into a home and raise children. Kids get things on their mother's knee that they cannot be without, also as adults, as part of, for instance, a fishing crew. It is a service and a relationship that the state and the market can never replace, because it is a gift, not a transaction. Robust communities have strong internal and external relationships. In reality, however, they are often fragmented, poorly organized, and therefore vulnerable. They are therefore often easy victims of external pressures that undermine their ability to govern their own affairs. As state and markets, they also often fail. This brings me to this document, the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries, the so-called SSF guidelines that FAO member states endorsed in 2014, a decade ago. They are the first negotiated international instrument specifically dedicated to small-scale fisheries. They are a global consensus on principles and guidance for small-scale fisheries governance and development. The last one I would mention here is that the common grounding is in human rights thinking, human rights principles. This document is close to my heart because I was part of developing them. It is an interesting document of around, 100 paragraphs. And there is at least one research question in every of those 100 paragraphs. The FAO, or the guidelines, argue that in order to make small-scale fisheries communities more secure and effective, they must be empowered. The guidelines are hopeful that civil society organizations can help to achieve this, and they therefore talk to them as much as they talk to states. The guidelines believe that solutions, and this is the important point, must be found in between and independent from state and markets. Their underlying paradigm is not neoliberal, but communitarian. When they talk about governance, they talk about co-governance. They are operating within that circle and not at the extremes of the pyramid. So the question is, what will happen to small-scale fisheries in the blue economy? Will it make them more vulnerable or more robust? Will it help to strengthen the link between small-scale fisheries and the local communities, or further weakening it. The blue economy is not a concept that was around when the SSF guidelines were developed in 2014. So it's not in the guidelines. But what the guidelines say is highly relevant for how to think about the blue economy. There are hopeful advocates among policymakers and academics who believe that the blue economy will benefit small-scale fisheries. They have faith in our capacity to grow our economies in a way that are beneficial to all coastal stakeholders, also small-scale fisheries. They are confident that the blue economy is a win-win-win. Until we have seen the empirical evidence, I think we should remain skeptical optimists. The burden of proof is not on us, but on them. The blue economy is not necessarily what the proponents says it is and what they promise. The blue economy is what it does in practice. That practice is for us as social scientists to critically examine, not just because of the promises of a better coastal future, but also because of the risks that are involved, especially for the traditional users of coastal space. If the blue economy comes at a loss to small-scale fisheries, that is what the blue economy is to small-scale fisheries, regardless of the spin that is often associated with it. I believe that if states do nothing to implement the SSF guidelines, the blue economy will indeed come at a loss to small-scale fisheries. As the weaker party, they are in danger of being overrun, pushed aside, further marginalized, and even eradicated. Thus, the blue economy raises issues that are about social justice. This is a book we put out some years ago. The blue economy can do and be different things in different situations and for different stakeholders. We may be positive to the idea, but skeptical to the practice. This, I believe, is also how we should approach the middle way solution. We may, for instance, if we are into producer cooperatives, be in favor of the famous Rochdale principles that are foundational to the cooperative form of organization, and indeed also the co-management approach. They read, in fact, much like the Human Rights Declaration, and they are also in line with how FAO is promoting the human rights approach to small-scale fisheries as part of the implementation of the SSF guidelines. But as much as we endorse these principles, we should be critical when we check how they are being implemented. Middle way solutions can take different forms. They may or may not function well. Cooperatives and co-management may be poorly designed and administrated. The devil is, as the saying goes, in the details. And he may be hiding in that circle, somewhere in that circle that I showed. But as we are looking for the devil in the detail, we should not forget about God, who is apparent in the design principles. They are not falsified by examples of malfeasance. They do not themselves need empirical evidence. They are defaults. We should not expect successful outcomes in a non-supportive institutional and political environment, which is the situation, for instance, producer cooperatives often find themselves in. If fisheries cooperatives and co-management arrangement are isolated exceptions from the dominant paradigm, they have all the odds against them. They have a better chance of success if a community-oriented governance system than in a market and in a system that is based where markets and state dominate. For the middle way, the chance of succeeding in small-scale fisheries would better be the norm rather than an outlier. It should be not a small circle, but a big circle. For the blue economy to be a positive force in small-scale fisheries, we must know what to do and what to do. This is, of course, a responsibility of the governors to get an understanding of. We should, of course, be as concerned with the successes as we are with the failures, if we can find them. And as academics, we have a role in helping the learning process work. The blue economy is a juggernaut that is hard to stop when unleashed. Thus, the blue economy raises issues regarding the limits of governability. When much bigger and more powerful actors move into coastal space, which they increasingly do, small-scale fisheries have to relocate, take their business elsewhere, which would be easier if we are just talking about space and not place. Small-scale fisheries need space to be free, where they can move around, chasing a fugitive resource. But they also have a place, they need a place to feel at home, where they have close and lasting relationships, where they have roots. We all do, don't we? What we have, when we come home, we are happy when we see people again who we know and who know us. That is what makes us feel at home. We need the freedom that comes with the market and the order that comes with the state. But we also need a sense of belonging that comes with the community. The challenge is to find the right mix. The sociologist Zygmunt Bauman has noted that communities have a limiting effect on freedom. And that there are a choice to be made about the kind of freedom that markets provide and the safety that communities deliver. Middle way institutions help reducing the conflict between the two, I argue. They provide a platform for self-reliance, for self-realization, for self-empowerment, and for social entrepreneurship. They also provide the safety we need from staying connected with other people. They offer an opportunity to meet new people and build new relationships, but they require careful and inclusive designs that enable rather than resist. Notably, there is no such thing as limitless freedom. We are not free to do whatever we want, and neither should we. We cannot be bounded by our, we are and must be bounded by our commitments to other people, by norms and moralities that guides our interaction, in fisheries as in other areas of life. This is what the conversation centers around at our mother's knee that I talked about. That is where we get our first lessons about the golden rule and Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. If we do not internalize these moral principles, communities would fall apart because we could not live together without them. People in small-scale fisheries have it no different. When their communities disintegrate, where do these principles go? The markets and the state would not be able to host them. Civil society may be able to step in, but it may be too late. So, dystopia, here we come. A small-scale fisher is not as the lonely wolf as he is sometimes portrayed. He enjoys his freedom, but does not live and operate in a social vacuum. He socializes with other fishers on land and sea. Fishers often take their community with them when they go out. They may compete for the biggest catch, but they also cooperate and form teams with other fishers they know. Fishing is more effective in that way, but also safer, which is a real concern. According to the International Labour Organization, ILO, small-scale fisheries is among, or perhaps the most dangerous occupation one can have. Moving away from fishing areas they know may cause considerable risk because their local knowledge does not apply in a new place. At home, the fishing grounds are known territories. They cannot just go anywhere. However, in the blue economy, the fishing grounds, beaches, dwellings of small-scale fisheries people are threatened. They do not have them to themselves anymore unless protective legislation exists to secure them. They do not, however, have often the formal title to their fishing grounds or beaches, sometimes not even to the place on land where they live and have a house. Therefore, they may wake up one day and discover that the tenure they have taken for granted is not as guaranteed as they thought it was. From a legal perspective, long-time continuous use should be enough to secure property rights. In practice, it doesn't always work like that when powerful intruders arrive. This is also the observation of the small-scale fisheries guidelines. They say already in the preface the following: small-scale fishing communities also commonly suffer from unequal power relations. In many places, conflicts with large-scale fishing operations are an issue, and there is increasingly high interdependence or competition between small-scale fisheries and other sectors. These other sectors can have stronger political and economic influence, and they include tourism, aquaculture, agriculture, energy, mining, industry, and infrastructure development. This may also be a Croatian experience, as far as I know. The SSF guidelines are clear about the need for securing the tenure rights of small-scale fisheries, as you can see here in paragraph 5.4. States, in accordance with their legislation and all other parties, should recognize, respect, and protect all forms of legitimate tenure rights, taken into account their appropriate customary rights to aquatic resources and land and small-scale fishing areas enjoyed by small-scale fishing communities. It's a bit cumbersome language, but you should bear in mind that every word and every sentence in that document is negotiated language. And that's the recipe for complex sentence structure. Okay. The SSF guidelines, as I mentioned, is a consensus instrument. It's a voluntary instrument. It's not hard law, but soft law for the world of small-scale fisheries that states have committed themselves to implement. They do not have a legal obligation to implement, but they do at least have a moral obligation. Hence, I need to hurry up, perhaps. No? The question, of course, is, have these guidelines been implemented? They have now existed for 10 years, and we can go out and check whether they are indeed implemented, which states are doing what they have promised to do. And that is a research issue in itself, which is we did in a book that came out a few years ago, and there's a new book coming out now with case studies from around the world where we are looking at the legal ramification, the legal reforms that the SSF guidelines are talking about to secure small-scale fisheries. Have they really been instituted and implemented? And that is, it's a big world out there, so there's a lot of things, many places, many situations to check. We should, of course, expect, and which we also find, a mixed result. Implementation of such guidelines is, as expected, both slow and cumbersome. And there is a lot of resistance. One thing is what states agree to when they sit in Rome or whatever. The other thing is when they bring what they have agreed to home and try to convince their own constituents. That's not necessarily an easy, straightforward thing. They often meet resistance because small-scale fisheries guidelines have opinions on what to do, which also goes against the interest of other stakeholders. The world, therefore, does not exist in black and white. The answer would not always be a yes or no. Some actions may have occurred because of the small-scale fisheries guidelines, but some might have happened regardless of them. So the evaluation is not that straightforward. I think we should not only be studying what is happening to small-scale fisheries in the blue economy. We should also look at the language that is used to legitimize it. Language is, as we know, not just a neutral representation of reality. It is also used to create it. Language is used to explain, justify, and argue things. Sometimes, however, it is used as gaslighting, aimed to confuse and mislead. In my own country, for instance, Norway, it sounds fair enough when large-scale fishing operators and organizations talk about the need for stable working conditions. What they really want is a management system that works in their interest to remain as it is. When they characterize the current management system as a success, it is indeed a success for them, but not necessarily for the small-scale fishing communities that are being increasingly marginalized as a consequence of the same system. Equity and fairness in the distribution of marine space and resources are in the current discourse labeled as leveling the playing field. I'm sure you have heard that being said. The level playing field metaphor gives the impression of a friendly sport within rules that everyone accepts and abides with. But marine space, I argue, is not like a football field where everyone plays according to the same rules and are known to all, both players and spectators. In the blue economy, unlike in football, the rules are part of the play. It's not only about scoring goals, but also about establishing rules. Football would be a different game if rules were at play as they are in the blue economy. Contrary to the playing field and metaphor, I believe Bourdieu's social field concept captures more of the reality as it unfolds in the blue economy. If you Google for Bourdieu and social field, you will get an image like that. Doesn't look like a football field, does it? It's a much more complex system that is hard to put on paper even. For Bourdieu, social reality is relational. He assumes, like Marx, that the relations shape interactions and that interactions shape relations in an iterative process. But they also do more. They also shape the people interacting. Their habitus is the concept he used for the people, the qualities of people. The name he borrowed from Latin. In other words, football shapes the footballer. Fishing shapes the fisher. The skills, rationalities, values, identities, and language. In the process of fishing, they become what they are as fishers. It is hard to predict how the habitus of small-scale fishers will evolve in the blue economy. But if we follow Bourdieu, it is reason to expect that they will become different from what they once were and what they now are. This is a quote that you may have to read twice to get the full meaning of it. The most basic economic disposition needs, preferences, propensities are not exogenous, that is to say, dependent on a universal human nature, but endogenous and dependent on the history that is the very history of the economic cosmos in which these dispositions are required and rewarded. You will find similar ideas with other researchers. Read Marcel Mauss, for instance, and you will find the same idea expressed in even more simple language. Whether small-scale fisheries will become what they want to be is a question they must answer themselves when they reflect on what the blue economy did to their communities, their way of life, and thereby themselves. They may feel happy and proud if they succeed to exploit the opportunities that the blue economy brings. But they may also end up disliking the outcome, feeling a sense of loss, regretting that they did not do more to prevent it, thinking that the government fail them. If they want to control the outcome, they will need to grab power over the rules that affect them. The SSF guidelines also talk about power relations and the need for the empowerment of small-scale fisheries people. The SSF guidelines are indeed an instrument they can use in their social struggle. They should not count on the state to implement the SSF guidelines, or that the market will come to their rescue. So here is what I think. Instead, small-scale fisheries people should explore middle way solutions that by creating institutions that are neither state nor markets, but something in between. These solutions must be found in the circle of that triangle. Models exist that can be emulated. Model figure as a menu they can pick from. But small-scale fisheries people may also be more creative and playful. They should start, I think, among themselves, in their own local communities. First, by deliberating the basic principles before they move into the practicalities of organizational design. External support will come, but only if they show that they have it in themselves to do something on their own. Empowerment does not only come from the outside, but also from within. And with that, I say this. Thank you.
Thank you, Svein. This was a really inspiring and fascinating lecture, and I think people also noted that you gave us 100 questions to look into. Each of the paragraphs of the SSFF has one question for us to answer, so I think we have our task set out. However, I think there might be some questions for you that you can take the opportunity to ask now. So if there are any questions.
I would love questions, but I cannot guarantee that I will be able to answer them. But let's give it a try.
Yes.
Hi. Hello.
Yeah,
Okay?
it's on. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I'm kind of stuck on one thing that you said that I think is true for the first world, but not for the developing world. And I wanted to ask you if you could maybe expand on your experience, perhaps in the developing world, and with regards to the state. You said that the state, you need the state for order. But I think that in many countries, the state is actually not the order.
Yeah.
Or it should not be the order. That's very, very problematic. Because there's a lot of corruption, and
Yeah.
especially with regards to fishing and fishers and small-scale fisheries.
That is in, does it work? Yeah. That is indeed the situation. You know, there are failed states out there where things doesn't work. And you can argue if there is states, countries, where the SSF guidelines are needed, it is them, you know. But that is where the implementation is predictably so, being more cumbersome, and you know, if there is no civil society to sort of fill in the gap, and in some countries there are. You can have a failed state but a very vibrant civil society, and that might be sufficient. The state, even if it's non-functional, may not necessarily be against reforms to, you know, that will improve small-scale fisheries. So that they may not be a stumble block, even if they are failed. You know, you can characterize them as failed. But there are also countries that have a failed state and a failed civil society. And they are, of course, that really needs the SSF guideline. And in order for them to guidelines be implemented, I think the initiative must come from the outside. There is a global civil society in small-scale fisheries, and there are other that works outside. And I think this is something that FAO is really aware of, and that is where they often concentrate their work as we speak. But I must also say that I think it is in countries where you both have a well-functioning government and well-functioning civil society, there is no guarantee that the SSF guidelines will be implemented there either. Thinking of my own countries, you know, I think the basic idea is that the SSF guidelines are mainly for the south and not the north. And what is problematic is, of course, that basic paradigm, that communitarian paradigm, whereas my country and other countries in the north and the west are guiding fisheries mostly from a neoliberal perspective. And therefore you heard some of the countries argue when the guidelines were finally adopted in that big meeting every second year at FAO. Some countries argue that these, you know, from the north argue that these guidelines are not for us. And if you go to Sweden, for instance, where Milena is, you know, the Swedish story is like is much like the, you know, the nothing is happening. The SSF guidelines are not part of the thinking, and that also applies to my own country and to other countries in the north. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you.
It is a voluntary document, and many people have said it would have been better if it was obligatory. It was hard law. But if that was the requirement, that was the ambition, you know, I don't think we would have seen the SSF guidelines, because it is a very progressive instrument. For instance, what they say about the empowerment of women, you know, that doesn't necessarily go well around the world. But even countries like Saudi Arabia had no, you know, problems with these documents, maybe because they thought, well, we're not going to implement it in the end. But who knows? That's why I find it as a social researcher intriguing to follow these guidelines. You can learn a lot, not just about the fate of these guidelines, but you can learn a lot about the implementation processes, which is not a linear process in reality. It's much more tricky than that.
Svein, I think the microphones are not working well, so if you maybe stand here, then it's maybe easier for people to hear you.
I cannot repeat all I said, sorry.
No, but I think for the next one. And I think Ilmark, you had the next question?
Thanks a lot for this wonderful speech, because I think it will be guiding for us for this post-action as well.
I can't hear that, sorry. Did you?
I was wondering how, since you have put the role, how they evaluate the role and potential of local fisheries movements, like Earth Forum of Fisher Peoples and Earth Forum of Fish Farmers and Fish Harvesters, who were, of course, like very effective, very active in the writing of these guidelines, then 2015 guidelines as well. So I was first wondering your kind of comment on this, on their role, and how, and the second part of it is perhaps that will be a guiding question and answer as well. How do you see the role of science, interdisciplinary and social science, to contribute to this?
The first question was about civil society, was it?
Bird fisheries movements, like
Fisheries movements.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the fisheries movements are often represented by civil society organizations. And I think civil society organizations played a major role in the creation of these guidelines. They were there in the meeting, allowed to speak, but not to vote. It was states that voted, but they spoke. And they spoke eloquently and with knowledge, which you couldn't say about many of the state delegates that were there. So they played a very, very important role. And the second question was about
The role of science.
the role of science.
Yeah.
Yes, and you can find that this throughout the document. Also in the beginning, who do they talk to? Who do they address? They address states and civil society, but also the academic community. And there is one paragraph in there that talks specifically about research, funding of research, and the obligation to actually implement the findings into their policies. I'm particularly proud of that paragraph because I suggested it myself.
Jose?
Thank you, Svein. I think it's a wonderful talk. I would like to comment on some issues related to the transformation that the blue economy developments and the state roles regarding small-scale fisheries have grown in the last decade. I think that in some sense the state has taken some relevant assets from the small-scale fisheries. First of all, the state began to transfer fishing rights, fishing possibilities from the small scale to larger scale, and put a large amount of fishing possibilities, fishing opportunities on the larger scale.
On the larger scale.
What we are looking now into all this new blue economy development is that it's not only about opportunities, it's now a key element is space. And now what we are looking for, we are attending, is somehow how the state is allocating space traditionally used by small-scale fisheries or even large-scale fisheries to other users. And this is something somehow related to bad science, bad implementation of marine spatial planning without taking into account many of the activities that are not well recognized in this development.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think should be our role? What do you think should be the role of social scientists in this analysis of the scenario, and what should be improved in how marine spatial planning is being developed to include all these activities that are not actually well covered in the data these tools are using them?
Well, it's very, very good observation. The state is not necessarily and always a friend of small-scale fisheries, as we know, but they do not necessarily always know what they are doing. We have reason to be a bit scared about the uncritical PR that is coming from governments and authorities about the blue economy. And we should remain, as I said, hopeful skeptics. The role of social science, well, of course, I'm a social scientist, so I think it is important, and we should. But I think also that we should be prepared to be disappointed, because at the end of the day, it's not knowledge necessarily that rules, but power. And I think the SSF guidelines are pretty clear about that. They have language to that effect that is incredible when you think and when you think that they were endorsed by all these countries. It's really some miracle happened. How on earth could they accept this kind of language? But they did, and that is encouraging. So where should we put ourselves in as social scientists? Where should we stay? Think about that. Where should we be in this triangle? Should we be at the top? Should we be, at the extremes? Or should we be in the middle, in that circle? If you ask me, we should be in that circle. Because there are interesting questions that needs to be asked in that circle. What should be the role of communities? What should be the role of the state? What should be the role of the market if we think that the solutions to many of these of the problems in small-scale fisheries lies in that circle and not at the extreme? I do not necessarily have a clear answer, but I think that is a place to locate ourselves more than we do. Too often we see ourselves in the service of government, which is not my way of thinking about what our role should be. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't disregard also the constructive role that the state can do. For instance, in terms of legislation, these middle way solutions also need a legislative basis, and that only they can develop their own rules, which they will, but they will also, at the end of the day, also have the state on their side. But what I try to argue is that the exciting things for social scientists in the blue economy is in that circle.
Okay, thank you. I think we're almost running out of time. There were 2 questions left. I think we can maybe, if it's a short question and we can have a short answer, we can take it now. And I think the remaining ones maybe have over lunch or
the problem is the long answer. I realize.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. Within that circle and looking at empowerment of those communities, if we think on all the cumulative impacts of global change, blue economy, marine spatial planning, everything is hitting fishing communities hardly, in particular small-scale fishing communities. So how we can enhance the robustness of those communities from this institutional setting point of view, helping them, not leading, not steering, but helping them in that kind of institutional designs and what is different from the conventional problems that fisheries communities face in terms of collective action. So easy question.
Well,
it's interesting what the short answer to this would be then. Sounded like very complex.
Well, the very short answer would be I don't know. But the point is that there is no simple answer to this thing. I do think that the empowerment of small-scale fishing communities must come from within that circle. small-scale fisheries communities are vulnerable because they do not have, they are often poorly organized. And they are incapable, for the reasons that was mentioned here, of governing their own affair. It's a knowledge thing, it's a power thing. Small-scale fisheries communities are not harmonious entities. They are subject to to how humans often interact with each other, which is not always friendly and constructive. And but I'm very concerned about what is happening on the mother's knee, to sort of restore the idea that communities are not just functional communities. Small-scale fisheries are not just functional. It's not just fishing happening there, but they're also heavily moral communities. And that morality is something that small-scale fisheries communities, as any communities, need to have as a sort of a fundamental premise for what else is happening there. So the question is, how do you nurture that morality? Where do you start? And I don't think you should start with the old guys. You should start with those that are not even. So I think, the school has a very important role to play. All those civil society institutions that are in the communities are important. But we do not often see their role and see the consequence of having them. But I think we need a stronger focus on those things. What is happening with education? What is happening with children? In small-scale fisheries communities, how are they brought up? Do they have a chance in life to not just learn the art of fishing, but to become mature, moral individuals? So there's lots to be said for that, and I sometimes feel that the emphasis also on women's role in fisheries is too much on that, mending the net, washing the clothes, those kinds of services which are important enough. But that is to minimize the role of women in small-scale fisheries. They are much more important than that. And that function, the mending of the nets and the baiting of the lines, they can easily be replaced by the market if you want. But those other things, they cannot be replaced by the state and markets. It has to work in a much more complete kind of relationships. The market teaches us, to play our violin with just one string, But we need to bring up children so that they can play on all the strings in the violin, metaphorically speaking.
Okay, thank you very much.
There was a.
I think there are lots of more questions, but I think we're running out of time, and I think we have the round table starting at 2:30, and maybe some people are a bit hungry as well. So I think we thank Svein for a great lecture.
Thank you.
And then lunch will be at the restaurant Barbican. I would suggest that you follow some of the locals. And then we see each other here again at 2:30. Thank you.
I think the last information I heard is that lunch is going to be served outside of this hall because of the rain. So let's see what happens outside, but I think that lunch is served outside of this hall.
Yeah.
Wonderful lecture.
Wonderful. Thank you. Excellent.